Hello, this is Jen McKee, and we are back with our Wheelchair Skills online training course, Module 2, Part 1. In this module, we're going to be covering a number of intermediate skills, including level transfers, bumps, and dips in Part 1. And in Part 2, we'll be talking about navigating slopes, carrying objects, and negotiating curbs. So level transfers are transfers when you are trying to get into or out of your wheelchair from a surface that is about the same height as a wheelchair. And this can be a lot different for a child than for an adult, pretty much because of the size of the person. There are a number of different transfer techniques that we can use. The stand and pivot transfer and the crouch pivot transfer both require the use of your legs. So as you push yourself up in the chair, you kind of stand and shuffle your feet to the side as you turn and sit on the surface that you're trying to get to. The lateral scoot transfer, the sideways scoot transfer, is what we'll be talking about mostly today. And it's the most common transfer technique that I use with the people that I have the opportunity to work with. A sliding board transfer is another strategy, and a sliding board is a slab of wood with a slick surface on one side that can be used as a bridge between the wheelchair and the surface that you're trying to transfer to. A lot of people like to use a sliding board for transferring into and out of a car, for example, because there's usually a bigger gap between the wheelchair and the car seat, and it just makes people feel a little bit safer and provides kind of a stepping stone to getting to the end destination. I haven't seen a whole lot of sliding boards here in Ireland, but they were fairly common for the populations that I worked with in the US. Some things that we want to consider when we are practicing transfers is the direction that the casters are facing. So if you think way back to Module 1, Part 1, where we practice our Castor Control, and you were able to feel the difference in how it felt to start and stop your chair with the casters facing in different directions, we want the casters to be facing in a direction that does not facilitate the chair moving while we're trying to transfer. Our foot support and the position of our feet during the transfer is also very important. And for adults especially, having the feet on the foot support and using the foot support of the chair as the primary support surface during a transfer is not recommended, because we know that the foot supports are not meant to hold a lot of weight, and we want to make sure that we're protecting the chair just as much as we're protecting our bodies. Another thing to think about with our foot support and foot position is that we want to minimize the risk of our feet getting tangled up and injured in the process of transferring. So keeping our feet in a position close to where we want them to end at the end of the transfer is going to be important to prevent them from getting all tangled. Having our feet slightly underneath us can be helpful, just when we think about biomechanics. And if you are trying to stand up from a chair and your feet are out far in front of you, it's going to be more challenging to get your hips up than if your feet are underneath you. So all of these things are just worth considering, and they might change based on the person who is transferring, the person who is assisting, the chair setup, and the setup of the environment that you have available to you. Another thing to think about is with the arm support. The arm support can get in the way, especially if you are doing a lateral scoot transfer or sideways transfer. So oftentimes it's not a problem for everybody, but when we're first learning how to transfer more independently, I definitely recommend either flipping the arm support up or taking it off, just to clear that as a barrier and prevent that from getting in the way. One of the most important things you can remember with a transfer, any transfer, is the head-hips relationship. And the head-hip relationship is really just using physics and biomechanics to our advantage to help make the transfer easier and less work for us. So our head and our hips, they move in opposite directions. If I want to transfer from my wheelchair into a kitchen chair that is on my right, I want my bottom to get up and over to the right. In that case, in order to transfer using the head-hips relationship, I'm going to lean my head and my upper body down and to the left. And we'll see what that looks like in the videos that I have for demonstration. That also is going to help us with our shoulder and wrist preservation. So a lot of people transfer in and out of their wheelchair numerous times throughout the day, which is fantastic. We want that movement to keep happening, but that's a lot of repetitive strain on the shoulders and wrists. That's a lot of load going through those shoulders and wrists and movement that can increase the risk of injury if it's done in an incorrect way, or if we're not being cognizant of keeping our shoulders and wrists safe. So the head-hips relationship is one strategy that we have to facilitate shoulder and wrist preservation. If you're assisting somebody with a transfer, the placement of your hands and the way that you're assisting them can also be really important. Now with a child, most children are pretty light and it's easier to assist them without a whole lot of strain for the assistant. I always recommend putting your hands on the person's hips and because that's where we really have the most control, is at the hips. But you can also try and control the legs and the knees if that's something that you're worried about by using your own body. And we'll see what that looks like in the video as well. Sometimes what we'll see is the person assisting the transfer will kind of loop their arms up underneath the armpits or around the trunk, around the body. And for some people, that might be totally fine. That might be the way you were trained, and that's absolutely acceptable. But for many people, they'll report, the person who is being transferred will report that it's very uncomfortable for them. And the person who is assisting the transfer might not have control if something were to go wrong. So I always recommend holding onto the hips, and we'll see what that looks like soon. When we're trying to facilitate more independence with transfers, it can be helpful to talk through the steps as you're going through them. So for example, if I'm helping somebody transfer, I ask them, which way is your body going to lean when we do this together? If we're trying to transfer to the right, then your head is going to be over my left shoulder, or to your left over my right shoulder. Also, trying to count down together so that they're able to push with their hands at the same time as you help with their hips. It's going to be really valuable, so it's less work for both of you. It's going to take a lot of patience for a lot of people when we're trying to be more independent with transfers and just get a feel of where our body is in space and how to shift our weight effectively. So don't be discouraged if it takes you a little bit longer the first few times you try to do it more independently with less help. I always like to have somebody there with their hands hovering the first few times that we do it independently, just to make sure we have that support if it's needed. So here I'm going to demonstrate an independent transfer. So I roll up to the chair. I try to bring the wheelchair as close to the kitchen chair as I can to shorten that gap between the corner of the wheelchair and the corner of the kitchen chair. My hand is going to be on the frame of the wheelchair and on the corner of the kitchen chair. And as I lean, I'm going to lean away from the wheelchair with my head down to utilize that head-hips relationship. So you're going to watch that again. And I also want to point out that as I take my feet off of the foot support, I'm going to try and line them up in a position where they won't get tangled. I scoot forward to the edge of the wheelchair or to the edge of the kitchen chair before I move myself across to the other surface so that I'm as close to the corner as I can be and there's not a very far distance for me to travel. We'll watch that one more time. And one thing I did not do in this video is I did not remove the arm support on the inside. I didn't feel the need to. It wasn't a barrier for me at this time, but as I was beginning to learn, if I was somebody who had not done this before, that may have been a barrier that was easy to remove. So moving my feet, so that they're positioned in a good way, that it won't get tangled. They're on the floor under my feet, and I am scooting up towards the edge of the chair to transfer and back towards the back of the chair once I'm in position. Here I'm demonstrating how to assist somebody. If this was a child and if Charlie was unable to reach the ground with her feet, I might use a step stool or some sort of a box or a block so that Charlie's feet could be supported and she could use them to help with the transfer. So we can see we're trying to transfer to the right. So Charlie's head is over towards her left or over my right shoulder. My hands, I'm grabbing her pants. I like to grab around the belt loop or the top of the pants. That's a good place of control, or just grabbing onto the hips. One thing I'd like to point out is that Charlie's hand, her left hand, is on the wheelchair handrim rather than on the wheelchair frame. That's something that I failed to explain to her, but that's something I would change. I would like her hand to be on the wheelchair frame and her other hand is on the corner of the chair. So as Charlie leans into my shoulder, we're counting together. 1, 2, 3. On 3, she leans forward and to her left. Charlie's bottom goes up and to the right, and Charlie's pushing with her hands to assist with the transfer. Our next skill is going to be getting over bumps or obstacles. For this skill, unlike many of the other ones we practiced, you might need to reposition or remove the anti-tip device on the back of the chair. And we're going to start by practicing with a pop and lean strategy. So we'll start by leaning back in order to pop the front casters up high enough to clear the obstacle. So if you remember in the last module, we practiced caster pops to get over grass and soft surfaces. It's the exact same movement as that, except we'll be moving forward now over an obstacle. So we'll lean back, we'll pop the front casters up. Once the casters land beyond the obstacle, we'll lean forwards with our chest to our knees to help bring the rear wheels over the obstacles and to prevent a backwards tip. If it's a really high obstacle, we might need to lean backwards if the rear wheels are on that high obstacle as we get over it. But for starting out, we'll start with low obstacles like the piece of wood that we have laid out on the ground in these videos. And as you become more comfortable with it and keep progressing, then the higher obstacles will require a slightly different orientation of where your body is in the chair. And that's something that you can practice with the spotter so that you're comfortable with where your body is and in preventing any tips forward or backwards. So we'll start this skill by practicing from a stopped position when we're close to the obstacle. And then once you feel like you have a good grasp on how to lean your body and move the chair, then we'll continue on and practice from a moving start so that we approach the obstacle and pop the casters up without stopping the chair before the obstacle. I also suggest trying this going backwards. Some people do prefer to go over obstacles backwards. And we do this by leaning forwards to get the rear wheels over the obstacle, doing a big push backwards, and then leaning back to allow the front casters over the obstacles. And of course, always with the spotter at first to make sure that there is no backwards tip. So first, we'll demonstrate what that might look like with an assistant. I always like, again, to verbally go through the steps and to have the person in the wheelchair participating in that process. So we'll ask, which way do you lean first? We rock backwards first to get the front casters over the obstacle. Once the front casters are over, we lean forwards and do a big push to get the rear wheels over the obstacle. So rock back and rock forwards. And again, here we're going to see what that looks like from a stopped position at the start and a nice slow and controlled way. One more time. She pops the casters up. Once the casters are over the obstacle, Charlie leans her body forward with her chest onto her knees and does one big push to get the back wheels up. Our next skill will be getting over dips or gaps. And getting over a gap can be a little bit more intimidating for some people than getting over an obstacle, but it's really a similar approach and is often easier to accomplish. So we'll start off by popping the front casters to clear the gap as we lean back. Then, once the front casters are across the gap, we'll lean forwards to push the rear wheel over the gap. Again, we can do this going backwards by leading with the rear wheel so that our body weight is forward, our chest is on our knees. As we push backwards, so the rear wheel goes over the gap, and then we'll lean backwards to allow the front casters to get over the gap. Another way to get over gaps is to approach it at an angle. So rather than going head on, you can do an oblique approach where you are coming at it from a 30 to 45 degree angle, which may be safer depending on the size of the gap and as long as 3 of the wheels are always supported. In this case, we want to shift our body weight away from the wheel that is unsupported. So in this first video, we didn't have many gaps around the house to demonstrate this skill, but if you imagine this, this small gap here, if you imagine it was a little bit bigger, a bigger dip, all I'm doing in this video is I'm pushing the front casters up and over. So a small caster pop until they land on the other side of the dip. Once they land on the other side of the dip, I'm leaning my body weight forwards so that the rear wheels can come over. Here is a pothole example. This was definitely more challenging for me. I'm going to approach the pothole, lean my body weight back, pop the casters up, and once my casters are over the pothole, I lean my body weight forwards so I can get the rear wheels over the pothole as well. Notice I'm trying to make sure that at least 3 of my wheels are supported, and it requires a couple of attempts for me to push those front casters up and get them over. Your body weight, where your body is in the chair, is definitely important for this because it can be easy for those front wheels to get stuck if they have too much weight on them. So that's it for part 1 of module 2. Keep practicing these. Keep practicing with the basic skills as well, so we can really start to combine a lot of these skills. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that if you're going through a door, many doors have a little bump or a little lip that you have to get over in order to enter and exit the door. So we can start to combine those skills together. Perhaps you have a grassy area where you can start to practice the caster pops with the obstacles and getting over an obstacle or across a dip in a grassy area. And there are a lot of different ways we can start to add new skills to the games that we've already started as well. So be creative with this. There are a lot of different ways to progress them. These skills take a lot of practice, absolutely a lot of practice. And a number of children who I worked with have been pretty fearful of some of these skills at the start, particularly around the obstacles, the wheelie pops, and the gaps. And starting off by letting them passively go through the motion. So as an assistant, as somebody helping them, allowing them to just sit and feel what it's like to go into that position, and then trying to engage them more and them help you as the user of the wheelchair. So think about different ways you can accomplish these in your home and in your local community, and let me know what works for you. I'd love to hear how it's going, and if you have any questions about specific strategies for the environments that you have set up or available to you, please let me know. So thank you so much for participating in part 1 of module 2, and we will be back with part 2 to continue on with more intermediate and advanced skills.